Meet Anya, is 2045, she doesn't have a job, her basic needs, housing, food, healthcare, are covered by a basic income, paid for by a nation running on AI. Her time is her own, to create, to learn, to connect. This is Ben. He lives in the same year. He gets the same basic income, but in his work, it's barely enough to survive. His life isn't free, it's a constant struggle. Two people, the same technology. One is living the dream, the other, a nightmare. What's the difference? It all comes down to one question, the single biggest debate at the heart of this entire idea. What happens to the value of money? So, what if AI makes universal basic income a reality? Hi, this is Haruto and welcome back to the What If Show. Today we are exploring one of the biggest problems of the AI age. But to get it right, we have to start by confronting its most common criticism head-on. Disclaimer. Now, before we dive into the rabbit hole, our user disclaimer. I'm not an economist, nor I am a politician. My goal isn't to sell you on UBI or tear it down. The purpose of this show is to explore the idea from all angles, ask the uncomfortable questions, and think through the consequence, the good and the bad. This is a thought experiment, not a policy proposal. The show is mainly based in the USA and China because they seem to be the closest nations to reaching AGI, which enable UBI. Also, this video also heavily assumes that AI will become so good that human labor is almost not needed anymore, which is a very big assumption. With that being said, let's get back to the video. The rate inflation debate. The idea of UBI sounds great, but there's a huge fear that hangs over it. Inflation. This is the single biggest hurdle. The question that decides if we get Anya work or Ben's. The argument is simple. If you give everyone more money, but there's still the same amount of stuff to buy, price will just rocket up. Your $1,000 UBI will be worthless because your rent and grocery will just cost $1,000 more. This is Ben's nightmare, a world where his basic income is just enough to chase the rising price forever. Let's do some simple math. A $1,000 per month UBI for every adult in the United States would cost roughly $3 trillion per year. To include every single person, it is close to $4 trillion, just for barely matching a full-time minimum wage annual income. If we want everyone to have a comfortable life, the UBI check would need to be at least 5 times bigger. That's more than the entire budget for Social Security, Medicare, and national defense combined. In fact, some can argue that UBI is just an extension of those social benefits. So, how can we possibly avoid inflation? There are two schools of thought. The optimists believe you can manage it. First, they argue you don't fund UBI by just printing trillions of new dollars. That would be a catastrophe. Instead, you fund it by taxing the massive profit of the AI companies that run the economy. The argument is that this isn't new money flowing into the system. We simply modify the flow of money. Right now, corporate profits often sit in bank accounts or get reinvested in financial markets. Taxing a higher portion of that and giving it to millions of people to spend on real things increase the velocity of money to support the UBI. But that is not the main thesis. The core of the thesis is the runaway productivity. If AI and robotics can boost US productivity by, say, 5% a year instead of historical 1 to 2%, that adds over 1.4 trillion in new economic values every single year. In this world, if demand for bread goes up 10%, a fully automated factory doesn't raise price. It just makes 10% more bread at a near marginal cost. When supply can scale instantly with demand, you term inflation. In fact, it is deflation. This is the economic engine of Anya world. In fact, small-scale ballers like the one in Stockton, California, so the recipient primarily spend money on necessity like food and utilities with no measurable impact on local inflation. The optimists argue that on a national scale, AI productivity would create the same effect. money would be absorbed by genuine economic activity, not just price hike. But the skeptic says, not so fast. They argue that this view is dangerously simple. First, you can't automate everything. You can't really print more land for housing in a city people want to live in. You can't just double the amount of lithium for batteries overnight. These real-world bottlenecks on things people actually want, good housing, cheap energy and resource, means that even with UBI, you still have too much money chasing to feel good. Put it in other words, demands for things are not the same. The price for digital goods, software, entertainment might fall to zero. However, the price for a well-located apartment could absorb your entire UBI check because everyone has more money, but they are all competing for the same amount of land. This is asset inflation, and it's what creates bad war. Second, they point out that getting that sleeping money from big corporations isn't so easy. It would require a massive political brutal fight to pass those taxes. In this scenario, UBI fails its core missions. It just creates massive uncontrollable inflations that eats everyone's saving and make life a constant struggle. The big gamble. So, the inflation question isn't an easy one to answer. It's the whole board game. It's a massive gamble. But for the rest of this video, let's make another huge assumptions. Let's say the optimists are right. We pull it off, we fund UBI, and AI-driven productivity keeps price stable. We build Anya world. Is the problem solved? Not even close. The economic challenge are replaced by far more difficult social and psychological ones. In a world where your survival is guaranteed, the entire meaning of work and ambitions change. For centuries, the drive to put food on the table and a roof over our heads has been the primary motivations for humanity. When that's gone, what takes its place? What do I do with my time? Doing hobbies? Investing? What's the legacy I can leave behind for later generations? In fact, those questions deserve a whole separate videos. There are too many variables to predict, and I don't know what I don't know. For now, I believe that human behavior will not deviate much, meaning only a small portion of the populations have enough motivations to strive for truly beyond excellence. Why beyond excellence? Because it's the standards for a human to be successful in this world of UBI. So when the answer to the questions, why did I get out of bed this morning, is no longer I have to, society could split along a new, invisible fault line. It's not a division of wealth, but a division of ambitions. You have two new informal classes, the leisure class and the driven classes. The vast majority of people might become leisure class. Their lives are easy, comfortable, and free from financial stress. They have endless times for hobbies, entertainment, and family. But for some, this freedom could become a trap. A life without a purpose can easily become a lost one. The risk is in poverty. It's living a meaningless life. A profound society-wide problem that could lead to digital escapism, social isolation, and a crisis of meaning. The first two are already showing signs from the usage of AI chatbot recently, with people feeling broken when their chatbot is deleted. Then you have the driven class. This is the small fractions of the population that still choose to work intensely. They are the scientists, the engineers, the entrepreneurs, and the leaders. It's not that they don't want to work. It's not that they don't want to enjoy an easy life like the leisure class. They simply want to be more adventurous and create something that they can feel proud of. These people are driven by an inner urge to create, achieve, explore, and tackle tough problems. Not just for the money. They are leading the charge in AI, creating new tech, and pushing humanity forward. Therefore, they also have a lot of weight on their shoulder. Of course, it wouldn't be a perfect binary. You would have spectrums, people who dedicate themselves to art, to community, to raising family, pursuits that aren't economically driven, but are deeply purposeful. Then, we also have people trying to move up the social ladder, those selling service or handcrafted products. The real fault line might be between those who create new value for society and those who primarily consume. And this is where the social fabric could begin to tear. Imagine if you are one of those driven people. You work 80 hours a week, not because you have to, but because you are driven to. You see the incredible value your work creates, and you see the tasks on that value funding the comfortable, challenge-free lives for millions. At first, it feels right, knowing you are helping society is a noble contribution. But then, you start to notice the classic prisoner dilemma playing out in real time. You see the consumers you are supporting acting in their own rational self-interest, consistently choosing cheaper imported products. After all, a nationwide UBI that could replace workers would require high robot tasks, making US products still more expensive and less competitive than those from developing countries. And with the increase in AI productivity, the robot tasks to support UBI will also be bigger, which makes US-made products more expensive, and the wheels keep going. So, as the creators in the driven class, would you feel betrayed? The feeling wouldn't just be economic. It would be a deep psychological resentment because it taps into a fundamental human instinct about reciprocal and fair. You would think to yourself, my life is spent in the stressful pursuit of progress, while the society I'm supporting has not only retired from ambitions, but is actively spending our collective wealth overseas. It's a feeling of profound unfairness, the sense that the social contract is no longer a two-way street. This is far more potent than the current debate over taxes. This is a feeling of being a sucker on a national scale. It begs the questions, what happens when the most indispensable people in an economy feel like the system is fundamentally unfair? They don't just complain, they start to leverage their power, and that's when this new social divide becomes a political crisis. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, and it's a powerful and optimistic counter-argument. The whole idea of a resentful-driven class assumes that human ambitions is a zero-sum game. What if it is the opposite? What if UBI doesn't create a society of passive consumers, but instead triggers the greatest explosions of human potential in history? Think of it this way. For all of human history, genius have been a lottery of birth. The next Einstein, the next Marie Curie, the next great artist or philosopher could have been born anywhere. But what if they were born into poverty, forced to spend 80 hours a week working a minimum wage job just to pay rent and put food on the table? Their potential is squandered, not by a lack of talent, but by a lack of time and energy. This is one of the most common reasons to support UBI. UBI in this field is the ultimate solution. By freeing billions from the daily anxiety of survival, you are essentially giving humanity's brightest mind a big chance to pursue their passions. It's a bet that for every 100 of people who choose a life of leisure, one person will use that freedom to cure a disease, invent a new form of clean energy, or create a masterpiece of art that enrich us all. In this world, the driven class wouldn't shrink, it would swell with new talents from every corner of society. It's a beautiful and compelling vision. But this new freedom to innovate runs into a timeless practical barrier. Resourced for turning an idea into reality. Anyone can have a breakthrough thought in the living room. You could sketch out a theory for a new battery, a more efficient solar panel, or a revolutionary medical treatment. In a UBI world, you have all the time in the world to perfect that theory. But to actually build, to test it, to manufacture, to scale it up for millions of people, that takes an immense amount of energy, material, and money. Remember, money is not being printed infinitely. It's simply increasing quickly due to massive AI economic productivity, and a huge portion is already taken out for UBI. So, a new kind of competitions emerge. It's not for job, but for a chance to build. It's a competition for access to the tools that can turn a blueprint into a reality. A competition to join the driven classes. Ultimately, we have more people competing for the same, but more abundant type of resource. As you can guess, this looks familiar. It sounds a lot like the system we have now, where entrepreneur and middle class competing for funding and resources to build a business and climb up the social and economic ladders. Then, we also have to understand that AI replacement will not happen to everyone at the same time. It will be a gradual change. With people being replaced later, we have more time to accumulate wealth and access until a universal basic income is implemented. At the same time, the people being replaced early will have a lot of resentment toward the tech guys for costing their jobs, at least until UBI is done. However, we also have to note that the wealth gap between classes will surely be widened too, and social mistrust will also increase as a consequence. The result is the same concentrations of power we talked about before, but the mechanism is different. It's not a sideways feedback loop, it's a very pragmatic issue. It turns back to our original argument. Power will concentrate on the few driven class people. And that's when their indispensability starts to reshape politics itself. The new elite. So we have a nation divided, but the division isn't what supporters of UBI had hoped for. The very system designed to erase the old elite and to create the most equal society in history has an unintended and deeply ironic consequence. It accidentally creates a new elite class, possibly holding more concentrated power and wealth than ever before because they have become unreplaceable. Moreover, the most talented and driven individuals are often already quite wealthy and they deserve it. UBI isn't hitting a reset button, it's just the next chapter for them. Now, think about the leverage. In our economy, if one CEO quits, the company replaces them. If one industry struggles, other rose. But in a future where the entire nation prosperity, the funding for every citizen UBI check depends on a complex, centralized AI engine, the handful of people who can build, maintain, and advance the engine holds all the cards. They are the top 1% of the top 1%. They are the people that AI cannot replace. And just like the elite of today, they will act to protect the system that ensure their status and stability. They wouldn't just complain about UBI funds flowing overseas. They would see it as a fundamental threat to the economic engines they built. A group this powerful doesn't just post angry comments online. They act strategically. This is the exact conspiracy theory about deep state people are speculating. We can imagine a playbook for how they would convert their status into political power. Phase 1 would be soft power. They would lobby, just like corporations do today, but with an argument that's almost impossible to refuse. They wouldn't say, we want more money. They would say, the system is at risk. The constant flow of UBI funds overseas to purchase cheaper goods is unsustainable. We need to reform the system to protect the economic engines for everyone's sake. They frame their self-interest as a matter of national security. Nationalist culture will take over. Phase 2 is the innovation strike. If their demands aren't met, they don't need a dramatic shutdown. There's no big red button to turn off the economy. Instead, they can organize a strategic slowdown of innovations. It means going the opposite directions of nationalists and diversifying their talent and wealth in other nations. Crucial system upgrades are delayed. The AI models that optimize the supply chains don't get their quarterly updates. After all, if everyone else is having an easy leisure life, the driven people have the rights and the freedom to switch to that mode too. It's a subtle creeping crisis. The UBI checks still go out, but the system holds stagnant. Public service may see minor cuts. It creates immense political pressure without a single person to blame. Phase 3 is the nuclear options, the threat of acid. This is the ultimate trump card. We already see a small-scale versions of this today, with companies and capital moving to regions with lower taxes. Now, imagine if the 10,000 people who run the American economy threaten to relocate their talents, their patents, and their headquarters to a competing nations that offer them a better deal. when the nation's primary natural resource is the brain power of a few thousand citizens, that resource can walk away. What do you think the reaction will be? Banning them to move freely is simply a human rights violation. Universal tax, it already exists. Excess tax, it might work, but it will only increase resentment. Faced with this playbook, what could a democracy do? The government will be in an impossible position. Either give in to the demands of this tiny minority, or risk the collapse of the entire system that everyone, including the government itself, depends on. This leads to the ultimate power shift. The driven class could demand a more direct say in governance. The argument will be a chilling logical. One person, one vote made sense when everyone's economic contribution was within a few orders of magnitude. But when the contribution of one engineer generates the economic surplus to support 100,000 citizens who do nothing but wait for UBI, is their votes really equal? Shouldn't those with greater stake and greater knowledge of the system have a greater say to protect it? This isn't a military coup, it's a quiet, negotiated transfer of power. The outcome might be a new form of government, not a democracy as we know it, but a technocratic oligarchy. That's a society run by a small group of indispensable experts, an elite class born from a movement that sought to abolish elites forever. Now, with its internal power structure rewritten, this new American nation has to face the outside world, and its very existence would change global balance of power forever. One nation under AI. A stable, prosperous America with a successful UBI would have a gravitational pull unlike anything the world has ever seen. It wouldn't need to conquer other nations, its sheer success would reshape the planet around it. First, you see the greatest brain drain in history. Why would an amazing engineer in Brazil or India stay home to work in a legacy economy when they could move to the US and join the driven class, becoming one of the architects of this new world? The promise wouldn't just be wealth. They can get access to the planet's most advanced tools, work on the most important problems, and gain the highest possible status. It's a promise of maximum impact and purpose. This could be a continuous, self-reinforcing cycle. The more talent American absorbs, the more advanced its AI engine becomes, the richer its citizens are, and the stronger its gravitational pull gets. Other nations would be bled dry of the very people they need to build their own bright futures. And you wouldn't have to think about it. Look at the percentage of Waterloo graduates, the best university in Canada, stay in Canada versus going to the States. This would force every other country into a difficult choice. Option 1, become a supplier to utopia. They could return their entire economy to produce the things the massive American consumers market wants, like luxury goods, tourism, raw material, and skill talents. They would prosper, but they would exist in a state of permanent economic dependency, their fortunes tied to the whims of the American consumers. Option 2, try to compete. This would mean launching a desperate, own-out national race to develop their own AGI, to fund their own UBI. It would be a new kind of arms race, a more complex one than the AI arms race we are having, where the final prize is economic sovereignty that almost everyone desires. And it's unlikely to be a race with just one winner. A more probable future is a new Cold War. You might have an American bloc, a Chinese bloc, and maybe a few others, all running their own AI engines and UBI system. They wouldn't just be competing for military dominance, but for the world's top talents, resource, and influence. Instead of one global superpower, the world fractures into a few self-sufficient, high-tech forces, fiercely protective of their own system. This isn't a world of open trade anymore. It's a world of fierce competitions and deep inequality, driven by the success of a few powerful nations. Final thought. So what if AI makes UBI a reality? It can lead to many endings, depending on many variables. Our thought experiment so that the dream of a post-scarcity utopia isn't a simple destination. It can lead to a whole new crisis, a social crisis of purpose, a political crisis of control, and a geographical crisis of global fractures. We might solve the age-old problems of economical survival, but the uncertainty is massive. We are left with psychological challenge of finding meaning in a world where contribution is optional. We are also left with ultimate questions about our social contract. Can we design a system that feels fair when contribution is optional? Can we set up a society that would expand the wealth ladder, allowing social class to move faster and to narrow the wealth gap? I would never underestimate the power of humanity. Maybe we will figure it out in the future. The important thing is the timing. If we can solve that before the mass UBI comes through, it will be perfect. But if we figure it out too late, that might be troublesome. Actionable advice. So, how do I react to it? Here's my thoughts and advice to you. 1. Follow the bias, not the hype. Pay attention to the real data from small-scale UBI studies. They are our only real map. Understanding how a 500 payment affects a real community tells us more about the future than any rank theory, including this video. 2. Focus on value and leadership. Let's be honest, humans don't like being told what to do, especially by a robot. An AI can be a perfect manager, it can optimize schedule and assign tasks flawlessly, but it can't be a leader. It can't inspire you when you feel frustrated, build a team culture where people feel value, or earn trust. In a world increasingly managed by AI, real human leadership will be one of the rarest and most powerful skills you can have. 3. Ask the second questions. It's easy to ask, wouldn't UBI be great? The harder, more important question is, and then what happens? Think about the chain reactions. If we solve the problem of money, what new problems of purpose, political power, and social cohesion do we create? The future is too important to not think of a few steps ahead. That's it for me. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy it.